the secret police of God. There is an organization within the Imperium of Mankind that has no fixed headquarters, no single chain of command, no public roster of members, and no obligation to explain itself to anyone except the Emperor. And the Emperor has not spoken in 10,000 years, the Inquisition. Its agents walk among ordinary people and among the highest officials of the Imperium alike, carrying authority that supersedes every other institution the galaxy's largest empire has ever built. An Inquisitor can requisition the resources of an entire planetary defense force. An Inquisitor can order the destruction of a world. An Inquisitor can arrest a Space Marine chapter master, a planetary governor, a cardinal of the ecclesiarchy, a senior magos of the Mechanicum, and nobody, legally, structurally, by the rules that govern the Imperium, can stop them. Thus, they answer to no one but themselves and the dead god they serve. This is not an accident, it is a design. The Inquisition was built to be exactly what it is, an institution so independent, so unconstrained, so deliberately placed outside the normal structures of imperial governance that it can investigate and act against any part of those structures without interference, including, if necessary, itself. The question worth sitting with, before anything else, is why an empire would build such a thing. The answer requires understanding what the Imperium is actually afraid of. Not Xenos, not rebellion, not even chaos exactly, though chaos is the thing it fears most directly. What the Imperium is afraid of, at the deepest level of its institutional design, is itself, the knowledge that any part of its own structure could be corrupted, infiltrated, turned, and that a corrupted empire defending itself against corruption would be defending nothing worth defending. The Inquisition exists because the Imperium's founders understood that the cancer could grow from within, and they built a scalpel specifically for cutting it out. Origins, the founding. The Inquisition's origins reach back to the very end of the Horus Heresy, to the aftermath of the most catastrophic civil war in human history, when the surviving loyalists looked at what had just happened and tried to understand how it had been possible. How had half the Space Marine legions turned traitor? How had the War Master of the entire Imperium, the most trusted being the Emperor had ever elevated, been corrupted without anyone detecting it until it was far too late? How had Chaos agents, word-bearers, chaplains, warp-touched infiltrators, the long, patient work of forces that wanted the Imperium to destroy itself, operated within the Great Crusade's own structures for years without being caught? The answer was uncomfortable. There had been no institution specifically tasked with looking for these threats. The Imperium's security had been largely decentralized, reactive, dependent on individual loyalty rather than systemic detection. When the betrayal came, it came from inside, and the inside had had no mechanism for watching itself. Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's oldest and most trusted servant, had begun assembling the answer to this problem even before the heresy ended. Working in secret, which was appropriate given what he was building, he had identified individuals from across the Imperium who had demonstrated specific qualities, not military genius, not political skill, not psychic power, though some had that too. What Malcador looked for was something harder to define and harder to fake. The willingness to pursue truth at personal cost, combined with the judgment to know what to do with it when found. Then he called them his Knights-Errant initially. They were the seed of what would become the Inquisition. Individuals operating outside the normal chain of command, investigating threats that the normal chain of command was not equipped to see or would not want to acknowledge. After the heresy, as the surviving loyalists assessed the damage and began the work of reconstruction, the institution these Knights-Errant represented was formalized, given sanction, given authority that would make its agents effectively untouchable by the structures they were tasked to watch, given the mandate that has defined it ever since, to protect the Imperium from the enemies within and without, by any means necessary, without quarter, without mercy, without the luxury of doubt. The Inquisition was born from the most painful lesson the Imperium ever learned. And it was designed never to let that lesson be forgotten. Structure and the absence of it. One of the first things people expect when they learn about the Inquisition is a chart, an organizational structure, a hierarchy showing who reports to whom, who has authority over whom, how decisions are made, and by whom they are reviewed. There is no such chart. The Inquisition is not structured the way most institutions are structured because a structured institution can be infiltrated structurally, corrupt the hierarchy, and you corrupt the institution. The Inquisition's answer to this problem is to have no hierarchy worth corrupting. Each Inquisitor is, within their area of operation, effectively autonomous. They receive their inquisitorial rosette, the badge of authority that grants them their extraordinary powers, from another Inquisitor who received theirs from another. In chains of personal sanction that stretch back to the founding, but that do not create command relationships. The person who granted you your authority is not your superior. They are simply the person who vouched for you. This produces an institution that is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Inquisitors operate alone or with small retinues of trusted agents, acolytes in various stages of training, specialists recruited from wherever their skills can be found, interrogators being groomed for eventual elevation to full inquisitorial status. They move through the Imperium without fixed base or fixed schedule, following investigations wherever those investigations lead, accountable to no timetable and no superior. The only formal structures that exist within the Inquisition are the conclave and the tribunal. A conclave is a gathering of inquisitors, voluntary, called to discuss matters of shared concern, debate philosophy and methodology, share intelligence, coordinate on threats too large for any one inquisitor to address. Attendance is not mandatory. The decisions of a conclave are not binding on inquisitors who did not attend or who disagree. They function less like formal councils and more like the conversations of people who share a profession and an understanding that their individual efforts serve a common purpose. A tribunal is different. A tribunal is called when one inquisitor is to be judged by others, when their conduct has been found so far outside the bounds of acceptable practice that other inquisitors feel compelled to call them to account. Even this is not a perfect mechanism. A tribunal's authority extends only as far as the assembled inquisitors are willing to enforce it, and an inquisitor with enough supporters or enough power, or simply the willingness to refuse the tribunal's judgment and keep operating, may effectively ignore its conclusions. This is a feature, not a flaw. The Inquisition is designed to resist external control. The cost of that design is that it also resists internal control when internal control is needed. The three Ordos. Within the Inquisition's deliberate structural ambiguity, there are three primary areas of specialization, three threats around which the institution has organized its thinking and its practice over 10,000 years. They are called the Ordos, and while membership is voluntary and the boundaries between them are porous, they represent the Inquisition's understanding of what it is most fundamentally protecting the Imperium against. The Ordo Malleus investigates the threat of chaos and demonkind. Its members, sometimes called demon hunters, are the inquisitors who go furthest into the darkness. The Ordo Malleus investigates chaos cults, demonic incursions, warp breaches, the corruption of institutions and individuals by the ruinous powers. They work in spaces where the boundary between the material universe and the warp has grown thin, dealing with threats that most of the Imperium is not supposed to know exist in the forms they actually take. Their most elite operatives work alongside the Grey Knights, the secret chamber militant of the Ordo, a space marine chapter so hidden that its existence is not officially acknowledged, whose warriors are specifically engineered to fight demonic threats, whose memories are wiped if they encounter something that cannot be allowed to remain in their minds. The Ordo Hereticus investigates internal threats, heresy, mutation, unsanctioned psyker activity, corruption within the Imperium's own institutions. This is perhaps the broadest mandate of the three, because heresy is everywhere. Hence, the Ordo Hereticus watches the ecclesiarchy for theological deviation that might slide into genuine chaos worship. It monitors the Adeptus Administratum for corruption that might serve enemy interests. It hunts unsanctioned psychers, humans with warp abilities who have not been claimed by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and trained to safely manage their gifts, who are therefore a constant risk of demonic possession and warp breach. Its chamber militant is the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, warrior nuns of extraordinary devotion, whose faith is itself a psychic weapon against the forces of chaos. The Ordo Xenos investigates alien threats. Its members, Deathwatch alongside their chamber militant, Monitor the activities of Xenos species, investigate alien infiltration of human institutions, study alien technology and biology and psychology in order to understand and ultimately counter the threat they represent. The Ordos Xenos maintains the Death Watch, a force of space marines drawn from various chapters and assigned to alien hunting operations, specialists in the specific forms of warfare that Xenos threats require. These three Ordos represent the three faces of the Inquisition's paranoia: the fear of the warp, the fear of internal rot, and the fear of what exists in the galaxy beyond humanity's borders. In practice, an Inquisitor is likely to encounter all three during a career, and the designation of Ordo is less a limitation on what an Inquisitor can investigate and more an indication of where their training and philosophy are most deeply rooted. Puritan and Radical. Within the Inquisition, perhaps the most significant divide is not between the three Ordos, but between two broad philosophical positions that cut across all of them: the Puritans and the Radicals. This division is not formal. There is no membership register, no official designation, no ceremony of alignment. An Inquisitor is a Puritan or a Radical in the way that a person is conservative or progressive, by the accumulated weight of their beliefs and their choices over time, visible to those who know how to read the signs. The Puritan position is straightforward in its logic. The tools of the enemy are contaminated by the nature of the enemy. Chaos corrupts. Alien technology carries alien purpose. Unsanctioned psyker ability is a doorway the warp can push through. An Inquisitor who uses these tools to fight the darkness they represent is not merely taking a risk. They are participating in the very process they are supposed to prevent. The ends do not justify the means when the means are themselves a form of the corruption you are fighting. The duty of an Inquisitor is to destroy the darkness, not to court it. The Radical position is equally straightforward in its own logic. The enemies the Inquisition faces are ancient, powerful, and not constrained by the same scruples they are asking the Inquisition to observe. A Puritan who refuses to use chaos-derived intelligence against a chaos cult is bringing good intentions to a fight against something that does not share those intentions and will exploit that asymmetry. The tools are not the threat. The use to which they are put is the threat. An Inquisitor who can wield demonic knowledge against demons, or alien technology against alien enemies, or unsanctioned psyker ability in service of the Emperor's work, is not falling. They are doing what the situation requires. Both positions have produced Inquisitors of great effectiveness and great horror in roughly equal measure. The most famous Puritan campaigns have ended chaos threats that would otherwise have consumed entire sectors. They have also executed populations that were later found to be innocent of the charges against them. The most celebrated radical breakthroughs have turned the enemy's own weapons against it with devastating effect. They have also produced Inquisitors who, having decided that the means justify the ends, may have found increasingly creative ways to justify increasingly problematic means, until what they were doing was indistinguishable from what they were supposed to be fighting. The Inquisition has no resolution to this tension. It has been debating it for 10,000 years. The debate continues because both sides are right about something important, and the question of which truth outweighs the other is not one that admits of a permanent answer. The acolytes, life and service. Below the Inquisitors themselves, the Inquisition operates through a vast and largely invisible network of agents, informants, specialists, and acolytes who constitute the actual human infrastructure of the institution. An acolyte is someone who has been recruited by an Inquisitor and is being trained, formally or informally, systematically or chaotically depending on the Inquisitor, toward eventual elevation to inquisitorial status, or toward a permanent role as a specialist in service of the institution. The path to becoming an Inquisitor has no fixed length. Some acolytes are elevated within a few years of recruitment, their gifts and judgment recognized quickly. Others serve for decades without elevation, not because they are failing, but because the work they do in their current role is too valuable to change, or because their Inquisitor does not feel they are ready, or simply because the opportunity for elevation has not presented itself. The retinues that Inquisitors assemble are extraordinary in their variety. An Inquisitor might travel with a former Imperial Guard veteran whose battlefield experience and ability to move through military environments is invaluable. A tech priest whose knowledge of machines and ability to interrogate cogitator systems opens doors that no amount of authority could. A psyker, sanctioned, always sanctioned if the Inquisitor is cautious, whose warp sight can detect things that no physical investigation would find. An assassin trained in the arts that the more regular branches of the Imperium's security apparatus find distasteful to employ. A savant whose perfect recall and ability to cross-reference vast amounts of information makes them effectively a living intelligence archive. These people give their lives to the Inquisition, not as a figure of speech, but as a literal description. The work is dangerous beyond what most military service involves, because military service at least involves a clearly defined enemy in a clearly defined location. Inquisitorial work involves enemies who look like ordinary people, who have infiltrated institutions that should be safe, who use methods that do not always announce themselves as attacks. Acolytes die. Often, the turnover in inquisitorial retinues is high, and the inquisitors who survive to old age, which is not all of them, have usually lost people they valued many times over. What keeps people in this service is harder to explain than what drives them away from it. Belief, in many cases, genuine conviction that what they are doing matters, that the darkness they fight is real, and the fighting of it is the most important work available to them. In some cases, simply the knowledge, acquired after seeing what they have seen, that walking away is not actually possible, that you cannot unknow what an inquisitorial career teaches you about what the galaxy actually contains. The Extremis Diabolus, Exterminatus. There is a weapon in the Inquisition's arsenal that represents the furthest possible extension of its authority, the most extreme interpretation of its mandate to protect humanity at any cost. Exterminatus. The complete destruction of a planetary biosphere, the death of every living thing on a world, not merely the enemies on that world, not merely the corrupted or the heretical or the Xenos touched, but every living thing, including the innocent. Billions of people, rendered void in a single act of authority. An Inquisitor can order this. The mechanisms vary: virus bombs that consume all organic matter, cyclonic torpedoes that strip a world's atmosphere, planetary bombardment sustained until nothing remains that could sustain life. The method is less significant than the outcome, which is always the same. A world that was inhabited is no longer inhabited. A population that existed does not exist. The theological and philosophical justification for this authority rests on a calculation that the Inquisition has made explicit in its training and its doctrine. If a world has been irreparably corrupted, if a demonic incursion has progressed beyond the point where it can be contained, if a chaos cult has compromised the planetary infrastructure at a level where conventional military response would simply spread the corruption further, if an alien presence has taken root in ways that make the population vectors for a threat that will expand beyond that single world, then the cost of that world's continued existence is measured not in the billions on its surface, but in the potentially trillions it will consume if the threat spreads. Oh, the math is terrible. The Inquisitors who have ordered Exterminatus have done the math and found it to be correct, or have convinced themselves they have, or have been wrong and known they were wrong and done it anyway because the alternative was worse. The records of Exterminatus actions maintained in sealed archives constitute some of the most morally weighted documents in the Imperium's history. Not because the decisions were made carelessly, but because many of them were made with full awareness of what was being chosen and why. The authority exists because the Inquisition's founders understood something that most institutions prefer not to formalize, that there are situations where the right answer is terrible, and that an institution tasked with making terrible decisions needs the authority to make them without waiting for approval from people who will not be present when the decision needs to be made. Whether that authority has always been used correctly is a different question. The Inquisition has no independent mechanism for reviewing its own Exterminatus orders. It has no process for acknowledging error. The worlds that should not have been burned have no advocate, because the people who would have been their advocates are gone. The Inquisition in the 41st millennium. 10,000 years after its founding, the Inquisition is simultaneously more necessary and more compromised than it has ever been. The threats it was created to face have not diminished. Chaos activity has increased since the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, which divided the galaxy and allowed the warp to bleed into the material universe at a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. Xenos threats press in from all directions. The internal rot that the Inquisition was designed to detect has had 10,000 years to work its way deeper into the Imperium's institutions. At the same time, the Inquisition itself has accumulated the specific pathologies of a 10,000-year-old institution that has never been effectively reformed. Its philosophies that began as reasonable differences of opinion have calcified into factions with deep institutional histories and accumulated grudges. Inquisitors who should be working together on shared threats are sometimes more invested in their disagreements with each other than in the enemies they are supposed to be fighting. The vast autonomous authority that makes the Inquisition effective against external threats also makes it effective at waging internal conflicts, and it has sometimes done so at considerable cost. The Inquisition has also never fully resolved the question of its own susceptibility to the corruption it hunts. A radical inquisitor who has spent a career using chaos-derived knowledge and alien technology in service of the Emperor's work is not automatically compromised, but they are not automatically uncompromised either. The Inquisition has produced its share of genuinely fallen members, people who entered the institution with the right intentions and emerged from it serving the darkness they were supposed to fight. The mechanisms for detecting and stopping these individuals are imperfect, precisely because the institution is designed to resist exactly the kind of external oversight that might catch them. Despite all of this, in the 41st millennium, the Inquisition remains what it was always meant to be, the last line of defense against threats that no other institution is equipped to face. When a chaos cult has infiltrated a planetary government to the point where the government itself cannot be trusted to report the infiltration, when a Xenos species is conducting operations on an imperial world that the planetary authorities cannot detect or acknowledge, when a demonic incursion is beginning in a location where sending a military force would advertise the threat before it could be contained. In these situations, an inquisitor arriving alone, with full authority, with no obligation to explain themselves to anyone, remains the most effective response the Imperium has. It is a terrible way to run a security organization. It is also, given the nature of what the Inquisition is protecting against, probably the only way that works. Famous inquisitors, faces of the institution. The Inquisition does not celebrate its members publicly. By its nature, it prefers anonymity, the quiet presence that watches without being watched. But history records certain names, inquisitors whose careers, for better or worse, illuminate what the institution is and what it can become. Gregor Eisenhorn, a name known to students of the Inquisition as the canonical radical trajectory, an inquisitor who began his career as a model of Puritan methodology, who pursued chaos threats with exactly the thoroughness and restraint that his philosophy demanded, and who over the course of a long career found himself making exception after exception, compromise after compromise, each one justified by the immediate circumstances, each one moving him further from where he had started. By the end of his recorded career, Eisenhorn had used demonic artifacts, had bound a demon to his service, had done things that earlier in his life he would have investigated other inquisitors for doing. Whether he fell, or whether he simply became what the work required, is the question his career has generated centuries of debate about. Inquisitor Lord Torquemada Coteas, of the Ordo Malleus, a Puritan of the most committed variety, famous for his use of psychic interrogation techniques that other inquisitors found excessive, and his chamber militant, a force of personally trained and devoted warriors called the Henchmen, to conduct operations that even sympathetic observers found to sit at the edge of acceptable practice. Cotes operated on Scarus sector for much of his career, and in conducting a centuries-long campaign against chaos corruption, with an intensity that reshaped the sector's institutions in ways that outlasted him. Inquisitor Amberly Vale, of the Ordo Xenos, known primarily through her association with the Commissar Tsiafas Kane and her editorial notes on his extensive personal memoirs. What her career reveals through these indirect sources is an inquisitor of considerable political sophistication, someone who understood that the Inquisition operates within a social context, that its authority depends partly on the willingness of other institutions to respect it, and that maintaining those relationships was as much a part of effective inquisitorial work as the more dramatic aspects of the role. These names, and the dozens of others that the historical record preserves, all are not representative of the Inquisition as a whole. They are the ones who left records, whose careers were dramatic enough, or controversial enough, or simply well documented enough to survive. For every inquisitor whose name is known, there are hundreds whose work was done in complete anonymity, whose investigations prevented threats that the populations they protected never knew existed, whose deaths were unannounced and unmourned by anyone outside their small retinues. These unknown inquisitors are perhaps the truest expression of what the institution is, doing terrible work in darkness for no recognition, sustained by conviction or habit, or the simple inability to stop now that they have seen what they have seen. The Inquisition is an institution built on a paradox that it has never resolved and probably never will. It exists to protect humanity from corruption. It does this by giving individuals extraordinary power with minimal oversight. Extraordinary power with minimal oversight is exactly the condition most likely to produce corruption. The institution designed to protect against the thing is itself vulnerable to the thing in ways that its design makes difficult to address. This paradox is not a failure of the Inquisition's founders. They understood it. Malcador the Sigillite, who assembled the Knights-Errant from whom the Inquisition grew, was not naive about what he was building. He was making a calculation that the dangers of an Inquisition with too much power and too little oversight were less catastrophic than the dangers of no Inquisition, or an Inquisition with too little power and too much oversight to be effective against what it was supposed to face. Whether that calculation was correct is not a question the 41st millennium has answered. It may be the kind of question that only the ending of the Imperium, one way or another, will finally resolve. In the meantime, the Inquisition persists. Inquisitors move through the Imperium, carrying their rosettes and their authority and the weight of what they know, investigating things that cannot be officially acknowledged, making decisions that cannot be officially reviewed, and serving an emperor who cannot officially sanction them because he has not spoken in 10,000 years. They are the watchers at the edge of the light, standing between humanity and the darkness that would consume it, using methods that the light would not entirely approve of, sustained by the knowledge or the belief or the desperate hope that what they are protecting is worth the cost of what they have become in the protecting of it. The Imperium does not thank them. It cannot. To thank them would require acknowledging what they do, and acknowledging what they do would require acknowledging what they do it against. And the Imperium has decided, at an institutional level, that most of its population functions better without that knowledge, and so they work in silence. And the darkness, for now, holds.